I'm Carmen Lundy. Thank you for tuning in to Jazz Speaks Art, presented by Afrasia Productions. Here's what's new. A new video series, Living the Jazz Life with Rhonda Hamilton, where Rhonda speaks to jazz veterans about the art of living the jazz life.
Welcome to Living the Jazz Life. I'm Rhonda Hamilton, and my guest today is a gentleman who is one of the premier multi-instrumentalists in jazz. In addition to performing and recording with his own bands, he's worked with many of the best known and most influential artists in jazz. Horace Silver and McCoy Tyner and Lee Morgan among them. And he's certainly very well known also for the work that he did with Miles Davis on the classic album Bitches Brew, and as a member of Herbie Hancock's sextet, which evolved into the Wandishi Band and then the group The Headhunters. So we are very, very happy to have Mr. Bennie Maupin as our guest today on Living the Jazz Life. Thank you so much for coming, Bennie.
Well, thank you for the invitation.
It's a pleasure to have you. And I mentioned you were a multi-instrumentalist. How many instruments do you actually play? I mean, I've seen you play tenor and soprano and saxello and flute and alto flute and clarinet and bass clarinet and piano. Am I leaving anything out?
Well, I've done some editing, so now it's just the tenor, the bass clarinet, the soprano, and the alto flute.
Yeah.
Yeah, just those.
Well,
in public.
In public. Well, I'm sure that you're always creating all the time, and when you compose, do you use any particular instrument, or does it depend on what your feeling is at the moment?
I kind of go just based on how I'm feeling. Like the bass clarinet is one of my favorite instruments to compose on because of the range of it. You have the very low portions of it and the middle of it, so I'm just practicing on it to be able to somehow get the beauty of those different qualities that it has. So for the last year or so, I've just been playing the regular B-flat clarinet, the one that kids learn to play in middle school. I just liked the clarinet when I was a kid.
You did, yeah. Well, and I've always especially loved your work on the bass clarinet because you get such a warm sound out of it, and it really does draw people in. We saw your concert about a week or so ago, and when you pick up that instrument, it's just like magic.
Well, I think because of the low frequencies, so much music is high frequency music that you hear with guitars and alto saxophones, sometimes with the soprano. But the low frequencies are more, something about them, they're more accessible. And I think that it enables me to do some things that I can't do on the other instruments. The character of it is just unique.
Well, this show is called Living the Jazz Life, and if you ask 10 different people what is jazz, you'll probably get 10 different answers. What is your definition of jazz? What is this music?
I don't have a definition of jazz. When people have asked me that question of what it is, I can't say what it is, because for me it's just creative music. But I will say this: Dr. Yusef Lateef, he developed a phrase, as you could call it, and his description of the music is audio-physio-psychic music that's spiritual, audible, and comes from the mind, from the heart.
Right.
So that sort of works best for me, but the use of the word jazz, that the label is just tacked on to so many things that I think it misrepresents what's happening in terms of real creativity.
Yeah, that's true. Well, you mentioned Yusef Lateef. You met him in Detroit. You were born and raised in Detroit,
Right.
which is a city that has such a rich musical history in a variety of styles of music. What was the advantage to you of growing up in a city like Detroit and being exposed to so many different kinds of music?
Well, I didn't realize that I was being exposed to different music. It was just something that was happening in the community. But early on in my life, I was talking to my mother one day, and she was telling me that she used to go to a theater because during the 50s, during the 40s, there were some theaters that were primarily open to black entertainers. Of course, there was the Apollo in New York. In Washington, D.C., there was the Howard, the Regal Theater in Chicago, and there could have been some others. But in Detroit, there was a theater. It was known as the Paradise.
Well, when did you decide that this was something that you wanted to pursue as a career? Music?
Well, I had some moments when I could kind of dabble a little bit. My family, they migrated from Mississippi to a big migration when a lot of black people came to Detroit, of course, because of the factories and the automobile industry. It was easy to get a job.
Yeah.
So my folks came, and so after my parents bought a house, we had rooms that we rented to some of those people who were in the transition period, just coming from Alabama and Georgia and different places. And this one family came, and they had a piano that they brought all the way from the South. It was an upright piano, but it was a player piano. It was kind of piano where you put a paper roll inside of it, and then you could pedal it, and you could hear it, and you could see the keys moving, and I was fascinated by it. I was always on it, and they stayed for a while in our house. So what I would do, sometimes I would listen to the roll and pedal it, but I would also try to play whatever I heard on the radio. In that period between middle school and high school, for the very first time in the history of the Detroit public school system, they offered instrumental music to any kids who wanted to take the classes. And that's when I started playing clarinet. You know, so that was 4 weeks or 6 weeks, whatever. And I really liked it, but it wasn't what I wanted to do. I wanted to play the saxophone because during that period when television is evolving, I got to see black saxophone players on TV because they all came to Detroit. So I got to see people like Bull Moose Jackson, Louis Jordan, who was very popular, another saxophone player, a guy named Earl Bostic. And then a little bit later, I got to see and hear Sonny Stitt, James Moody. The show came on like on a Saturday, and he would guest artists to come and play a tune. And that's how I started to get my first exposure to what was happening with that.
That's great. You actually saw it on television.
I saw guys on television, and that's when I fell in love with the saxophone. I said, yeah, that's a nice sound.
Yeah.
You know, and then there was a kid in my neighborhood. He had a saxophone. He was a little older than me, but he was sounding pretty good as far as I was concerned. So I used to go near his house and just stand outside and listen to what he was doing.
Well, you know, Detroit is known for a lot of great jazz artists. You mentioned Yusef, Lateef. There were so many others, but everybody also associates Motown with Detroit.
Yeah.
So many great R&B and soul artists. You worked for the Four Tops, isn't that right?
Yeah, I did. I got one of my first road gigs through the Four Tops. One of my friends that I went to high school with, she told her brother about me, Johnny Griffin, the pianist. And he's the one who did a lot of those sessions in Motown. Because Johnny Griffin was technically very developed. He played classical, definitely played all the stuff that he needed to play for the church and the weddings and various things. But he's on a lot of those early Motown recordings. He was the music director for the Four Tops. This is before they became very famous. They were doing some different kind of music. In fact, they were kind of bucking the trend because the trend was basically race music, where black artists had to be in a certain place, doing a certain form of R&B. That had to be
in order to be accepted. They had to play in that style.
And they were doing something a lot more musically advanced. We had played a place called I think it was the 500 Club that was near the boardwalk, and played upstate New York in the area known as the Borscht Belt.
Up in the Catskills?
Up in the Catskills, yeah. Where the last show starts at 2 o'clock in the morning. And it was just great being with them because, you know, the work was easy. We did our shows and Then during the day, we just relaxed and hung out on the countryside up there. That was really nice. But it was during that time that I got to go to New York for the first time. I was walking around New York and I saw this really famous club called the Five Spot. And Thelonious Monk was playing that night. So I came back that evening and I stayed all night. It was the most amazing experience of my life.
Was that your first time actually hearing Thelonious Monk, or were you
No,
familiar
I
with
had
him
heard
before?
the recordings,
Okay.
but I never saw him
Mm-hmm.
until that night.
And did that really change your life?
I had that, what you call it, an epiphany.
Yeah.
I sat there and I said to myself, I'm gonna live here.
You made the decision right then and there.
Yeah, I said, I want to live here because Thelonious Monk was the band featured, but around the audience, I saw all these famous people that I had seen in magazines and Ebony magazine and Downbeat and on album covers when there were album covers. And I just was like, wow, everybody lives here. But I had met so many people when I lived in Detroit. I made it a point to always be somewhere. Because before I turned 21, it was hard because you couldn't go into clubs at 21.
Well, that's something that you did. I think that's very important. You went and you made a point to hear a lot of music, right?
I fought for it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that some advice that you would give to a young artist who wanted to pursue their career? I mean, you really have to listen a lot, I would think.
You gotta listen. It's a listening art.
Yeah.
So people who listen, if they train their ears, and it's not impossible, they can do okay. You have to have a series of different skills. Definitely you have to be able to sight read. You should be, so that you can fit into an ensemble where maybe the music is totally written, and there's no room for any real expression in terms of improvisation or anything, but you just interpret what you see. So from taking private lessons, and that helped me to move forward. I spent a lot of time generally with some of the older musicians in Detroit, because some of those guys, they had been in the Navy, they had played in the Army band, and they came back with some pretty good skills. So, being younger, they kind of helped me out and say, yeah, this is what it is.
You mentioned Yusef Lateef earlier. He was a particular mentor of yours.
Well, yeah, Yusef was there because he's from Detroit, and then was introduced to his music in 1954, and just admired him so much because of what he represented. First of all, his reputation was different from a lot of the other musicians. He did not smoke. He did not drink. His diet was different because he was a Muslim. He didn't eat any pork. And he was a really beautiful guy. He was a big man. He was like a gentle giant. Really soft voice. And I got to sort of see him from afar. Just in awe of who he was and what he was doing, because he would always come with something different. I mean, he would play the blues in such a way it would just make you cry. Just that beautiful, warm sound. And he had some things that he would do with a shuffle beat, or he would play Spartacus, of course, on the oboe and playing the flute and those different things. But he was the first one that I heard who actually started to incorporate scales from other cultures in his music. And a lot of people were very critical of it because it sounded different. But I just listened and made me more curious about music in other parts of the world. I think that from my perspective, now there's this whole genre of music known as world music. As far as I'm concerned, Yusef Lateef is the father of world music. No one was doing that in the 50s.
And now when I think of this music, you think of jazz as being a music that, just to use the word jazz, as a music that is open to so many different cultures. It doesn't seem to matter what musical tradition you may have come from or what your nationality is. You can bring that to the music and incorporate it within a jazz context.
Well, the music here, there's creative music, it encompasses everything. Yeah. So, there's no limits to what you can do.
Well, this concept of the audio, physio, psychic music, how does one learn that?
The things you have to know,
Okay.
just the basic theory of music. You got to know scales, major scales, minor scales. You have to know about intervals and all of that kind of stuff. And then, you know, the system that he came from was something that was very much put together by the great pianist Barry Harris. Yeah.
Another person from Detroit.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But Barry had studied extensively classical music, and he was very analytical, and he had a system to show guys how to play bebop and blues, how to play on chord changes, tunes like I Got Rhythm, things that were typically coming from that tradition of playing. And Yusef used those techniques and developed them so that, you know, for years he taught at the University of Massachusetts.
Mm-hmm.
People want to learn about improvisation. So there's some things that you have to know. I mean, you've got to have enough knowledge of harmony to be able to understand how to move from one position harmonically to another. And just before he passed away, I had a conversation with him. I called him to thank him for being so generous with me. And that was our last real contact. But I did have the good fortune of recording with him. The recording we did is called In the Garden. I'll have to get you a copy of it. But that was like, I couldn't believe it. You know, I was like, wow, I can't believe I'm actually getting to record with him in this setting. And the music for the organic orchestra was just that. It was very organic. It was based on grids and things that are not easily explainable. But everybody had a system, either a rhythmic component that they adhered to, and then there were some other instruments that were part of it.
Well, when you do perform, what is it that you want to communicate to your audience? What do you want them to come away with after seeing a Bennie Maupin concert?
I just want them to be happy. So I just do everything I can to be in the best life condition that I can be in. And just come with the music. I think it's just a matter of what your intentions are. Many times, it's not about how you feel, but if they're there, you know, I always see that as that's responsibility. They came, they given me their time. I've got to come with something. So I've been lucky in that I've had the same group of guys play with me for a while. So we don't over rehearse because I don't want it to be so slick that it's sterile, you know. So I'm always coming with something different. Sometimes at the last moment, just to see how people are going to react. But I asked the other guys to bring something too, so it sort of works out that we're able to, you know, present. But I hope that when the audience finishes listening to whatever we present, that they feel that the investment of their time was worth it. I tend to feel that if it's coming from your heart and not your head, because it can be a very heady pursuit, and you can tell when guys are just thinking themselves through everything. They're just thinking, and they're not allowing the music to flow through them. You know, people ask me a lot of times, "Oh, what was it like being with Miles?" It was great being with Miles. Miles never told me anything about what he wanted. I finally figured it out one afternoon that I said, he just wanted me to be myself. You know,
Yeah.
that's what
I've heard so many great musicians want. That's all they want. They hire you because you're you, and they want you to bring you to the music.
But he's the master of nonverbal communication. No. Because I was sort of in shock for a second, because when I got this call that he wanted me to come in there, I ended up being in a booth with Miles on my left and Wayne Shorter on my right. It was like, I'm in here with my heroes, you know. But it was always cool. He's very passionate about coming and playing for the people again, all those things, you know. So I got to see him in a way that was good. He was in great shape. We never recorded late into the night. It was never that way. 10 in the morning to 1 in the afternoon, he would immediately leave and go practice his boxing with his boxing trainer, because that's what he loved. He loved boxing. I think the gig that I got that was a very, very pivotal thing for me was to work with the great Horace Silver, 1968. Yeah, that was like going to finishing school.
Such a great composer
and a great person.
And a great person.
A great businessman. He's the one who taught me about publishing. Talked to me about making it a point to have the rights to music, and then I learned, how complicated that was, especially for guys of his generation and some of the guys who were business savvy from previous generation. They had to really fight, and a lot of times they lost because they signed things without looking carefully to see who owned it. So Horace was like great.
So that's something really important that young artists should pay attention to, the business side of the music.
I think you have to, because it is a business. And if you're not paying attention, then the possibility of being taken advantage of is just that much more possible, So, and the laws are changing all the time. Things changing all the time. He told me about copyright, just copyright the tune, send to the Library of Congress, do this, do these various things. But he was a person who was meticulous about the preparatory stuff. When we had a rehearsal, he was like, toss the meeting. He was just like, no, that's not what I want. This is what I want. And when you gave him what he wanted, yeah. He was very warm, but very
So unlike Miles,
specific.
He was very specific about what he wanted. Okay.
Miles never said anything. Miles just walked past me and said, "You're crazy." But I missed an opportunity. It wasn't for me. I always wanted to play with Miles. Always. That was my dream. I said, yeah, all my heroes play with Miles. Sonny Rollins, Sonny Stitt, and then Coltrane, and then it's like, okay. So finally, after things started moving, my friends are working with Miles now. It was like Jack DeJohnette, he and I are very close. Chick Corea, we're all like in this group that Miles is bringing forward. He's been bringing my guys. And so finally, Wayne and Joe Zawinul were on the brink of forming Weather Report. So Jack had talked to Miles about me, and Miles called me. But he called me at a time when I had just taken a regular gig with the great Lee Morgan.
I did want to ask you about Lee Morgan.
Okay, this is the turning point, right? So Miles says, I want you to come and work with the band. And I was just silent. So he did the typical Miles thing. He said, MF, do you hear me? I said, yeah, I hear you. He said, well, I said, I can't do it. He said, what do you mean you can't do it? I said, I just took a gig with Lee Morgan. He just slammed the phone down. He said, oh, shit.
But Lee Morgan, tell us about Lee, because he's been my
I was introduced to his music through the years that he spent with Art Blakey and the Jazz Messengers, because they came to Detroit. And I got to hear them on matinees, because you could be 18 and still come to a matinee. You had to sit in a certain area. But all I wanted was the music, and I didn't come here. And I heard him playing with Bobby Timmons and, Cedar Walton at one time, and then Jamie Merritt. It's really incredible. Curtis Fuller, all these
Wayne
people.
was in that band.
Wayne was a part of that. Wayne came, that's when I got to be Wayne. I wanted to be Wayne. And I said, yeah, I want to play like that. But it was like, it was amazing. So we were rehearsing, and Lee just opened the door and came in the room. But he was so polite, he apologized to Horace. He says, I'm sorry to disrupt your rehearsal, but I just want to speak to your saxophone player. And he just walked over to me. And he says, I'm getting ready to do a date for Blue Note. Will you do it with me? And I looked at him. I said, yeah. He said, okay. Somebody will call you.
Was that Teru or was that Caramba? What date was that?
Caramba.
Caramba.
That was the first one.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And after that, we were like,
Yes.
we were just bonded. You know, then we did, the things we did with McCoy and Andrew Hill. We did a series of things. And
Tender
then,
Moments, that record, right? With,
Tender Moments,
yes.
yeah.
Uh-huh.
Tender Moments.
Yes.
And then finally we did Live at the Lighthouse.
Live at the Lighthouse.
Yeah.
Neophilia. I always remember that.
Okay.
Neophilia.
That's one of those emotional outbursts.
Yes. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, you've had the opportunity in your career. You came up in an era where there were so many great artists that you had the opportunity to work with, like Lee Morgan and McCoy and Horace and Miles.
Mm-hmm.
What advice would you give to a young musician now if they want to try to gain that level of mastery that you have? What's the most important things for them to do?
I tend to feel that the mentor-disciple relationship is very important. So I have multiple mentors. Like I was saying, that once a week I speak to Sonny and I let him know what I'm doing and
Sonny Rollin.
and just get his feedback. I think most artists or many artists definitely suffer with depression, and I had some issues with that. But then, as we were talking earlier about Buddhism and the chanting Nam-myoho Renge Kyo, I started chanting, and somehow, whatever it was I was going through internally, it just shifted. The depression went away, and I've never been bothered by it again. So I think it's important to have a spiritual component to your life. It just can't be all music. No, you got to think about the people. I ask young musicians now, because I get to work with a lot of young musicians, teaching at Cal Hart. I ask them, okay, what are you going to do when school is over? And most of them, they don't have any idea. You know, so I said, based on the trends of the times with technology and everything, find something else that you can put your passion into aside from the music, so that you can sustain yourself as a human being. So the ways the music is taught, it's taught in a mechanical way. I mean, guys are learning transcriptions. You know, you can't go and play for your supper and play a Cannonball Adderley transcription. Nobody wants to hear that. If people are having dinner, they would like to have something that's appropriate for that environment. So guys don't get to be with the mentors who have the experience. I came along at a time when so many of these great people were alive.
Yeah.
I didn't get to know a lot of them personally, but I certainly got to be in environments where I could overhear conversations and you know, how they dealt with the frustrations that they dealt with when they were younger and how they fought back.
Do you have any regrets of the path that you chose or the steps that
None.
you took in your career? That's
Absolutely none.
Mm-hmm.
I said no. I have no regrets.
Mm-hmm.
Even though in my worst times, I'm so happy that I was able to endure.
Mm-hmm.
You have to endure.
Yes.
That's the thing.
And what is your routine? I mean, do you write music every day? What is your daily routine?
I'm always thinking about lines. You know, something, lines and chords, and mess around at the piano a little bit, and playing things on my instruments to see how they feel wherever they are, and you know, where the ranges are, and if the melodies are melodies that really work for me. So I've got a bunch of new things that I'm getting ready to present. Yeah.
Well, you have traveled a lot in your career, traveled all over the world.
Yeah.
And so what do you feel about this music in terms of how it relates to the world, like what it can do to bring people together?
Well, once I had the opportunity to travel, then I started to develop that perspective, because you meet the musicians, they come, they want to meet you, they want to talk to you, they heard the records, and they want to know about this tune or that tune, or if you know a favorite musician of their own. And that just really opened up my ears, and it enabled me to realize the level of respect that people outside of America have for this music. That was the big eye opener. Yes. When I went on that tour that was sponsored by George Wein, there was a group that was on that tour. They were from Philadelphia. They were a gospel group, strictly gospel, straight out of the church. And they were known as the Stars of Faith. And after everybody had done their thing, the Stars of Faith would be the last act on the bill each night. And I can remember standing backstage, listening to them, and feeling what they were doing because they were good. I mean, the stuff just make you cry, you know? And I'm standing there, and I'm looking out at the audience. So all these people were in Germany or Italy somewhere, they're sobbing.
Well, because it awakened something deep inside of these people's hearts.
It sure
They
did.
didn't realize it
Sure
before.
did.
You know,
It
and
sure
that's that whole connection, that spiritual connection,
Yeah.
and music from the soul.
Yeah.
And I think that's your message to us, is that
Well,
jazz is
that's
a
it.
music from the soul and the spirit, and that's why it touches people no matter what their background.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So much happens that doesn't get covered. So I hope that some of the things that we've been able to dialogue about are, you know, helpful in some way or another. But I'm always open to share whatever I can.
Yes, yes.
You had better listen.
You better listen. Well, it's been such a pleasure listening to you, Bennie Maupin, today. Thank you so much for being our guest and for sharing so much, and thank you so much for your music as well.
Thank you. Thank you.
I hope you'll join us the next time on Living the Jazz Life.
Yeah, continue on. I wish you all the best.